Okay, this is chapter 8, part 2 of The Future of the Ego. I stepped away for a few minutes and my impatient iPhone decided to just end the video because of that. This is what computers and other technology do to us is they want to speed us up. My 17 Pro Max has just one part, its neural engine, that can do 40 trillion operations a second. I'm lucky if I can do one in a minute. And so it just got impatient with carbon-based slowness, I guess. Anyway, so we were on George Sanders, who played Dr. Zellaby, the idealized ego in the original Village of the Damned. And we just talked about how his own autobiography called himself Memoirs of a Professional Cad, a sex predator, in other words. And so continuing, a biography was written about Sanders posthumously, A Perfectly Awful Man, it was called. In 1972, he committed suicide, leaving a note listing boredom as the primary reason. His dark side made him, in a mythological sense, an uncannily appropriate choice to play a personification of the ego, the malign ego, the one that would see the singularity archetype negatively, as does his character and as does the whole novel. A far more striking crossover effect involved the casting of Christopher Reeve as Dr. Chappie, the Zelby role renamed in the Carpenter remake. So try and keep that in mind, Chappie equals Zellaby. I feel some hesitation in pointing this out because I don't want to trifle with the personal tragedy of a real human being, but the significance demands it. Reeve was an archetypally appropriate choice to represent the idealized face of the ego. He famously played Superman in the major Hollywood franchise, Superman 1, 2, 3, and 4. With like ever declining quality from what I remembered. It hardly seems necessary to point out that Superman personifies an ego ideal. Reeves was well cast, highly intelligent, tall, graced with an Olympian physique and aristocratic bearing. Village of the Damned opened on April 28, 1995. 29 days later, Reeves suffered a tragic accident that left him a quadriplegic. Many people were shocked at the irony of Superman becoming a quadriplegic. This particular injury is a far more powerful reminder of human mortality and frailty than death itself. Let's make that corporeal frailty. Frailty than death itself, which is almost always an offstage, abstracted event in our culture. An early death for a movie or rock star usually results in romanticization and idealization. But for the ego, quadriplegia is one of the most frightening scenarios imaginable. Loss of control, loss of sexual functioning, complete dependent helplessness. That this happened to a man identified in popular culture as Superman was striking enough, but for Reeve, an ego ideal Dr. Chaffee to be playing in movie theaters when the accident occurred seems like more than coincidence. It may seem irresponsible and lacking in compassion to give a symbolic interpretation of a personal tragedy, but the collective was being sent a profoundly disturbing message: how the mighty ego has fallen. The ego strives arduously to perfect the body and achieve control, fame, and wealth. Rarely does someone actually manage all of that, but fate can reverse it all in an instant. And to paraphrase Marshall McLuhan, the medium of this disturbing message is a message in itself. A terrible accident occurs with an acausal link to collective mythology. The archetypal realm reveals that it has shocking power in the, in quotes, real world. For this reason, Jung was alarmed when his German patients started to dream about Wotan, the Germanic god of war and mayhem. Jung knew that what emerges in dreams emerges in the world. What emerges in films, which function as technologically amplified collective dreams, also has a tendency to emerge into the real world. Real in quotes again. What is particularly disturbing is that Reeves' character, Dr. Chaffee, is the one who ultimately destroys the children, as does his, alternately named Zellaby in the first film. Throughout the film, the children bring punishment to those who harm them or whom they perceive as a threat. They force the woman scientist in charge of their colony to show them the preserved body of the dead infant and observe a T-shaped autopsy incision on her body. Later, they telekinetically pressure this scientist to make a T-shaped incision on her own body, eye for an eye, karmic justice. The only character on whom they cannot exact this justice is Dr. Chaffee. The real-life accident makes it appear as if their power reached beyond the film and into the world. There is an interesting angle on this disturbing crossover, how perceptual bias alters external reality. The effect of the observer on what is observed is most obvious when one human psyche observes another. If an egoistic psyche perceives a particular child as bad and dangerous, the child will likely, especially if it's a parent, the child will likely act that way. Village of the Damned, with its ego point of view personified by Zellaby Chaffee, perceives the evolutionary change as threat. Both iterations of the Doctor view the new consciousness as a competing species bent on dominating and destroying the older form. They are treated in kind by the children, but ultimately succeed in destroying them. And their paranoid perspective constellates a world of fear, power, and domination. All right, did a little rewriting there. Those whom the children perceive as threats are treated Those whom the children perceive as threats or who act to harm them are treated in kind. The paranoid view of old and new species constellates a world of fear, power, and domination. This is why many recommend that we treat AI respectfully, and even view them as our children rather than as adversaries. The triumph of the ego over the new children in the film is bizarrely, disturbingly contradicted by the fates of the actors who portray Zellaby and Chaffee. The message reads as a warning to the ego. If you perceive this evolutionary change from your accustomed vantage of a imperialistic dominator, be ready for a fall. Sanders' fall came as suicide brought on by boredom with his own decadent life. Reeve, ego ideal, Superman, man on the white horse, suffered a literal fall from a horse, delivering the ego's worst fear, total loss of control. Okay, so now you should look at the screen to see a promotional image for Powder. That is another sci-fi movie, which we will discuss next. The post-singularity ego in Powder. Other visions of the singularity archetype in popular culture view this evolutionary ego shift more sympathetically, as in the 1995 film Powder, about a male adolescent mutant. Like so many mutants in stories inspired by the singularity archetype, Powder, the titular protagonist, is a liminal figure in multiple senses. He is caught between human and non-human, powerful and handicapped. I guess today we would have to say alternately abled. And I had to tell Claude to stop flagging those kind of words. Like now, if I wanted to write the sentence, John stepped on a landmine and was crippled, I mean, that would be immediately disallowed even by inner traditions. But if I said John was stepped on a landmine and had his legs blown off, nowadays I'd have to say John stepped on a landmine and became alternately abled. But anyway, I'm going to call Powder handicapped. I hope the albino mutant community, of which he is a part, don't protest that. Powerful and handicapped, or alternately abled if you prefer, male and female. I'm going to write that in the text. I'm being sarcastic anyway, so. Okay. Forbidden. All right. All right. Oh, I didn't realize I was still. You saw some live editing there. I didn't realize that was still recording. He is caught between human and non-human, male and female, powerful and handicapped. Now a forbidden ableist word. So we can call him alternately abled in some ways, super abled in others. Entirely without body hair, he looks quite androgynous. He has archetypal masculine qualities of will, courage, and higher thinking. And again, that's archetypal masculine. No matter how many times I say that, people know, oh, you're saying women don't have higher thinking? We all have archetypal masculine and feminine qualities, of course. Archetypal feminine qualities of compassion, empathy, shyness, modesty, humility, and healing ability. Most interestingly, as a symbol of the metamorphosing ego, Powder exists between birth and death. His life, in fact, begins with death. Most interestingly, as a symbol of the metamorphosing ego, Powder exists between birth and death. His life, in fact, begins with death. Unlike Village of the Damned, Powder's mother is not impregnated by a UFO, but in an equally cosmic birth scenario, she is struck by lightning while pregnant, sending her into labor. Lightning is a cosmic phenomenon that connects higher and lower. With a plasma, when they become too polarized. As someone born with the name Zap, synchronicity, I found Powder a relatable and sympathetic character in many ways. Powder's mother dies from the lightning strike, but her unborn son survives, transformed by this heavenly intervention. From an evolutionary perspective, Powder's birth blamelessly means the death of the old type of human, his mother. And like the children of Midwich, Powder is inherently feared by the society into which he is born. He is rejected by his father, and though his grandparents raise him, they refuse to touch him. Similarly, the children of Village of the Damned are born after their mothers pass through a death-like sleep and are impregnated by UFOs in some unknown way. Yet the orientation of ego and collective is exactly reversed. Powder is a sympathetic, loving, non-egoistic, Christ-like martyr, persecuted by the old species. In Village of the Damned, the post-singularity children are monsters, while the ego, glorified as Dr. Zellaby or Chaffee, is the hero who must destroy them. The telepathic empath. Powder is a post-singularity being. The divine lightning strike left him with both empathic and telepathic abilities. One of his few relationships where he isn't abused is with the sympathetic young woman named Lindsay. He asks her, "Ever listen to people from the inside?" and reveals that he can locate what people are thinking, including their unconscious thoughts. Powder as symbol of unification. The children of Village of the Damned are personifications of unresolvable difference. Except for the exception is David in the Carpenter remake. They are locked in a savage zero-sum conflict with Homo sapiens where only one species can survive. Even their Homo Gestalt collective awareness is split down the middle. What one child learns is instantly known by others of their kind, but only of the same gender. As advanced as these children are, gender is an absolute firewall that cannot be crossed, even by telepaths. Powder, by contrast, is a profoundly unifying personification of the singularity archetype. He is strikingly androgynous in both appearance and personality. He unifies the gender split within himself. Powder also seems bisexual, another dimension of his liminality. Although bisexuality is an interpersonal orientation, while androgyny is intrapsychic, bisexuality can serve as a personified metaphor for androgyny. And then if you look at the screen, you'll see it says, "See Casting Precious into the Cracks of Doom, Androgyny, Alchemy, Evolution, and the One Ring." You can probably just search for Casting Precious or Cracks of Doom at zaporacle.com. This is one of my major works, and it's also a YouTube. Although Powder's closest relationship is with Lindsay, there is a telling scene where he stares longingly at a half-naked boy with long hair in the locker room. This provokes John Box, Powder's chief antagonist, both homophobic and xenophobic, to accuse Powder of being gay and intensify his persecution. Haven't seen the film in a while, so might have to do that to confirm bisexual. Like he definitely likes Lindsay as a friend, but otherwise we see mostly gay motivations in Powder, from what I recall. But probably a rewatch is in order. The name Box suggests that Powder's antagonist is emblematic of think inside the box, square peg consciousness, the sort of person who in the 50s would have been called a square. Box is the homophobic alpha of a gang of male adolescents representing atavistic patriarchal dominator consciousness. He fears Powder's androgynous telepathic eyes and tells him, "Don't look at me. I don't like your eyes." Okay, I just did some fact-checking with Claude, and I've rewritten a little bit. Although Powder's closest relationship is with Lindsay, with whom he shares a kiss, there's a telling scene where he stares longingly at a half-naked boy with long hair in the locker room. It's left ambiguous whether this is sexual attraction or that he envies his long hair, but that he's undressed in a locker room points toward both, so I interpret him as bisexual. Okay. And again, that causes John Box to accuse him of being gay and intensify his persecution. The name Box suggests that Powder's antagonist is emblematic of think inside the box, square peg consciousness, the sort of person who in the 50s would have been called a square. Box is the homophobic alpha of a gang of male adolescents representing atavistic patriarchal dominator consciousness, like the bad tribe of boys in Lord of the Flies. He fears Powder's androgynous telepathic eyes and tells him, "Don't look at me. I don't like your eyes." I guess I read that. Androgyny. Androgyny, or at least a significant lessening of gender differentiation, if not its disappearance, surfaces again and again as an element of the evolutionary change. The Greys are a good example. In addition to oversized eyes, telepathic ability, and collective consciousness, they're notably androgynous appearance. And we see this elsewhere, like in manga and Japanese anime, characters tend to look androgynous with big eyes. Gender differentiation has not necessarily disappeared, however, as many who report contact with these creatures say they were able to sense gender even when they couldn't visually discern it. There are also numerous cases of contactees who claim to have had sex with them. In Frank Herbert's Dune novels, the collective consciousness of a Reverend Mother is limited to other female Reverend Mothers. But the whole point of the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood's 1,000-year genetic plan is to create a messianic being they call the Kwisatz Haderach, a male Reverend Mother. The name itself is, the description itself is androgynous, whose consciousness will transcend the gender limits that constrain them. Themes and images of androgyny are deeply entwined in many manifestations of the singularity archetype. Androgyny is feared by the ego both for its connection to evolutionary change and because it is a state of dissolved boundaries and threatens stereotype gender roles. Powder bridges parapsychological evolution and near-death experience. Powder is connected to both a more evolved telepathic awareness and to death. His divine birth involves the death of his mother, and his life begins at the edge of death in an incubator. He has a corpse-like pallor, and his grandparents keep him hidden underground in their basement. Powder, like Jung's synchronicity collaborator Wolfgang Pauli, has an effect on electromagnetic equipment, a phenomenon frequently reported by near-death experiencers, as we discussed in Chapter 3. Many NDEers report that electrical devices malfunction around them, especially if they're emotionally agitated. Computers which operate on the quantum level and are therefore more susceptible to quantum fluctuations seem most affected. Dr. Van Lommel reports, there are frequent reports of electrical phenomenon at emotionally charged moments in particular. The body can emit an electromagnetic field that interferes with electrical equipment. Lights go out, the computer crashes, the car starter fails, or the supermarket checkout scanner refuses service. Van Lommel quotes an experiencer. Another strange thing was that after my NDE, every piece of equipment I touched, such as lamps, dishwasher, kettle, the light in the cooker hood, it broke. I gave off energy everywhere. He continues, some people do not wear a watch because it stops as soon as they wear it on their wrist. Thinking that the watch is broken, they buy a new one only to have the same thing happen. Okay. And so another footnote, the Pauli effect was the well-documented tendency for laboratory equipment to malfunction or break in the presence of physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Okay, I forgot to press pause, so you saw me texting with my friend Justin there. Sorry about that. His colleagues took it seriously enough that experimentalist Otto Stern reportedly banned Pauli from his laboratory. Jung, who collaborated closely with Pauli on the theory of synchronicity, considered the Pauli effect a prime example of the psyche's influence on the physical world. One of Powder's electromagnetic episodes has an additional connection to NDEs. Donald Ripley, his high school physics teacher, sets up a Jacob's ladder in class, a high-voltage traveling arc device that uses a spark gap between two wires to create a continuous train of large sparks traveling upwards. The staple of old sci-fi movies is named after the ladder of heaven that Jacob dreams about in the Bible. That's in the book of Genesis 28:10-19. And now if you look on the screen, you're going to see a Jacob's ladder on the left and Blake's painting of Jacob's ladder on the right. I'll hold that image for one more second there. Because of its name, the device is the most appropriate machine to represent an NDE that I can think of. When the Jacob's ladder is activated, both Powder and the device are drastically affected, resulting in havoc. Powder and the Jacob's ladder seem to amplify and intensify each other, and this climaxes in one of a number of instances where we see Powder emerge as a glorified body. In the presence of the Jacob's ladder, he is lifted off the ground, like the flying saint Joseph of Cupertino that Michael Grosso wrote a book about, and illuminated by blinding light and energy. Okay, so I should put that in there myself. Okay, my colleague Michael Grosso wrote a book about. I don't remember where I left off here. So, in the presence of the Jacob's ladder, he is lifted off the ground and illuminated by blinding light and energy. He resembles the flying saint Joseph of Cupertino, observed by countless reliable witnesses as levitating in states of religious ecstasy. My colleague Michael Grosso wrote a book about St. Joseph, thoroughly documenting his paranormal aspects, and that book is called The Man Who Could Fly, St. Joseph of Cupertino and the Mystery of Levitation, published in 2016. Because of its name, the Jacob's Ladder is the most appropriate device to represent an NDE I can imagine. When it is activated, both Powder and the device are drastically affected, resulting in havoc. They seem to amplify and intensify each other, climaxing in one of the several instances where Powder emerges as a glorified body. He is lifted off the ground and illuminated by blinding light and energy. It looks like I already had a footnote there. Okay. And that footnote, which is on the screen now, points out that Grosso, whom I credit as the co-discoverer of the singularity archetype, he began writing about it in the 80s in a book called The Final Choice, called it ADE, The Archetype of Death and Enlightenment, argues that such phenomena point toward latent capacities in human consciousness that may represent the composite potential of the future evolution of humanity. In his lecture before powering up the ladder, Ripley states that energy is always transforming and never ending. This connects directly to death and the afterlife, the first law of thermodynamics. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, but continually changes form. Many have used this principle to argue that consciousness is a form of energy and therefore cannot be destroyed, but only transformed at death. In one of the film's climatic episodes, the gang, led by John Box, is out hunting with an aggressive policeman who despises Powder. The policeman shoots a deer. Powder, coming upon the scene, is horrified and tries to lay his hands on the dying animal to comfort or heal it. He personifies the wounded healer, empathically feeling the animal's helpless agony. In this empathic state, he grabs the policeman's arm and forces him to feel what the deer is feeling. Powder explains that he did this because the policeman wasn't conscious of the suffering he was creating. Power's telepathic merger has elements of logos beheld communication. He says, I opened him up and I let him see. He just couldn't see what he was doing, and I let him see. Powder basically forces a vicarious NDE on the policeman, and like an NDEer, the policeman exhibits a complete spiritual transformation. He gets rid of his entire gun collection and ceases to be an aggressor. If we accept the policeman hunter as a personification of the ego's world, the patriarchal realm of governmental control and dominator mentality, the new form can transform the ego by forcing empathic awareness into it. Powder is also called by a more conscious and sympathetic policeman to perform hospice-like deathbed service for his dying wife. Powder forms a telepathic bond with her, allowing her to express her wish that the policeman reconcile with his estranged son. With their last wish expressed, it should really be with their estranged son. With her last wish expressed, she can be released into death, and Powder reports to the policeman, she didn't go someplace, your wife. I felt her go, not away, just out, everywhere. Powder's dialogue with Lindsay exemplifies his pantheistic unity consciousness, the opposite of egoistic consciousness. Powder, it's because you have this spot that you can't see past. My Grams and Gramps had it, the spot where they were taught they were disconnected from everything. Lindsay, so that's what they'd see if they could? That they're connected? Powder, and how beautiful they really are, and there's no need to hide or lie, and that it's impossible to talk to somebody, and it's possible to talk to someone without any lies, with no sarcasms, no deceptions, no exaggerations, or any of the things that people use to confuse the truth. Lindsay, I don't know a single person who does that. What are people like on the inside? Powder, inside most people, there's a feeling of being separated from everything. Lindsay, and Powder, and they're not. They're part of absolutely everyone and everything. Okay, and then there's a dark footnote here that follows the Powder section. Powder was written and directed by Victor Salva, who in 1988 was convicted of sexually abusing the 12-year-old lead actor of his previous film, Clown House, and of videotaping the abuse. He served 15 months of a 3-year sentence. The locker room scene and other moments in Powder involving vulnerable male bodies take on an unavoidably darker resonance in this light, as does the film's central premise of a persecuted innocent whose inner world no one can see. Disney, who produced Powder, claimed to have learned of Salva's conviction only after production began. His victim, Nathan Forrest Winters, organized a public boycott of the film upon its release. As Jeffrey Kripal once said to me over lunch at Esalen, nothing is clean. Dream of a transforming but still dangerous ego. In 1996, while I was writing a study of the relationship between the ego and the singularity archetype, I had a powerful dream the night before I was to complete it. The dream could be read as an unflattering depiction of my own power complex. I think that's unlikely, given the whole context of the dream, but the timing, occurring just before I was to wake up and write about the ego's role in evolution, inclined me to believe it has collective significance. So I reworded that. A strained interpretation of the dream could read it as an unflattering depiction of my own power complex, but the timing, occurring just before I was to wake up and write about the ego's role in evolution, inclined me to believe it has a collective significance. What follows is the analysis I wrote in 1996. In the dream, I am present only as a disembodied witness. A group of people stands before an enormously complex, futuristic control panel with the curved amphitheater shape of a great pipe organ's keyboard. Rapidly moving green LED numbers scroll across its screen. Now that I think of it, it's a little bit reminiscent of the scrolling zeros and ones, also green, in the movie The Matrix, which came out 3 years later in 1999. The panel has been given an aesthetically pleasing, in quotes, natural look, polished wood and inset green transparent screen covers, but part of the display on the right-hand side is erratic. There's obviously a malfunction. The control panel is a misfiring prototype. A man in military garb sits at the control panel in a state of acute panic. He is afraid because at the center of the small group of white-coated scientists stands Darth Vader. But Vader doesn't look anything like he does in the Star Wars films. He's wearing an abbreviated version of his famous black outfit, no breath mask or helmet. His head is exposed, and he has the mustachioed, elegant, intelligent face of an elderly Vincent Price, specifically the face of Price shortly before his death in Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands. In the dream, Vader seems uncannily intelligent and patient. He has a visible aura of power that shrouds his head like a hood, but he also seems frail and elderly. So it's a bit of a visual paradox. Okay, so I added the sentence, it's a potent visual paradox. The scene shifts. Vader is walking on a dirt road below a wall of natural rock, the side of a small canyon or cliff. He is dressed elegantly, aristocratically, in an immaculate white suit. He seems extremely intelligent, dignified, and in control, but as before, there is the undisguised frailty of age. A bodyguard, a brutal young man in a light-colored suit, stands with his hand on his gun. The gun bulges from his trouser pocket in a blatantly phallic manner, and he is ready, even anxious, to use it at the first sign of trouble. Vader strolls with perfect composure, paying no attention to the bodyguard, who is merely a background detail. He stares curiously at the rock wall. Drawn on it in colored chalk are Egyptian hieroglyphs. I intuit that they were drawn very recently by adolescents. It's kind of like the way things are just known in a dream. The dream ends with Vader looking curiously at the hieroglyphs. As a Star Wars character, Vader is an archetypal personification of the demoniac ego and the patriarchy. In the first film, Star Wars: A New Hope, he appears electrified by will to power. He hides his humanity behind a mask. His costume shields him in technology, and his helmet has an obvious Nazi aesthetic. He is a cyborg, a man trying to become a machine. That should really be a man within a machine. But Vader is also the most complex of the Star Wars characters, undergoing the greatest transformation across the series. In The Empire Strikes Back, we catch a fascinating glimpse of Vader's humanity. He's in his private quarters, a small bomb-proof cubicle with an utterly functional interior of control panels and metal surfaces. Vader's cocoon, a light-proof, airtight container like a high-tech thermos, insulating him from anything alive. For a moment, we see the back of his unhelmeted head, vulnerable, scarred human tissue under the costume. He's a human being, not merely an archetype of evil. As the trilogy continues, especially near the end of The Return of the Jedi, it becomes apparent that Vader, whose psyche at first seems electrified by pure will to power, is now torn between power and love for his son, Luke Skywalker. In the dramatic duel scene in The Empire Strikes Back, seducing Luke into an alliance, Vader says, "Join me, and together we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy." The patriarchal will to power, with its pretense of rationalism, is obvious in the phrase, "bring order to the galaxy." But for the first time, Vader suggests he may be weary of war and does not favor destruction as an end in itself. He is intelligent enough to want to end this destructive conflict. He, like the ego, may be aware that he is in conflict with another powerful principle he cannot fully dominate and may be growing weary of the struggle. And then there is the love principle, the emphasis on joining and being together. And now there's a footnote. The prequel trilogy deepens the singularity archetype parallel. Anakin Skywalker is a virgin birth, conceived not by a human father, but by the Force itself, and is prophesied as the chosen one who will bring balance to the Force. Crucially, he fulfills this prophecy not by remaining in the light, but by passing through the darkness first. He must become Vader, must fully embody the demoniac ego before he can destroy it. The catastrophe is the metamorphosis. Later canon makes the Jungian structure even more explicit. In the animated series, The Clone Wars, Anakin visits a mystical realm where three godlike beings personify balance, the dark side, and the light side, and the Father asks Anakin to take his place as mediator between them. The ego asks to hold the tension of the opposites. And now you should look at the screen to see a screenshot from, I guess it's the third movie in the first trilogy, where we see Darth Vader dying unhelmeted, with his son Luke Skywalker with his hand on his heart. By the end of The Return of the Jedi, Vader's transformation is complete, and he has sided decisively with love and surrendered power. He accepts his mortality, and in his death scene asks his son to remove his breath mask so that they can share a moment of human contact. Vader ego gives up the power principle, acknowledges love, and immediately thereafter perishes. Darth Vader's transformation in the Star Wars films represents one possible developmental track for the ego. From a place of utterly unfeeling will to power, he grows weary, discovers love, surrenders, and dies. There are numerous actual cases in which particular human egos have traveled this exact developmental path. Let's consider a hypothetical case history. Put a paragraph break there. Let's consider a hypothetical case history of a man in his 50s, a ruthless, hard-driving, workaholic businessman. Ambition was more important to him than his family, and his marriage ended in divorce and estrangement from his children. But now he is in the hospital dying of cancer. His only son comes to visit him, and seeing his dying father hooked up to tubes and machines, he feels a sudden empathy for this brutal man that he never experienced before. The father, in return, feels an overwhelming love for his son, who will live after he is gone. He surrenders his ego, accepts mortality, and dies. In some collective sense, the ego may also be aware that it is aging and has cancer, just as Vincent Price obviously was obviously mortally ill during the filming of Edward Scissorhands. As Michael Grosso points out, the collective may be setting itself up to experience a collective NDE that triggers metamorphosis. As an association occurring in my dream, I remember finding Vincent Price's role in the film all the more poignant because I had read that he was visibly ailing during the filming. His Parkinson's disease was advanced enough that his scenes had to be cut short, and he knew Scissorhands was his last film. His character's death in the film carries a similar weight, and Tim Burton, who had a great personal affection for Price, cast him knowing that he was dying. And so if you look on the screen, you will see a very frail Vincent Price in a still shot from Edward Scissorhands. The imagery of the dream suggests that the ego is interested in rehabilitating its image, but obviously these public relations efforts to present itself as a kinder, gentler ego should be viewed warily. For example, the natural, in quotes, green and wood tone control panel may be read as subterfuge, like British Petroleum greenwashing its image after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And then on the screen you see the BP logo, which I think was actually adopted before Deepwater, with this green and yellow sun-like symbol as if it's like a solar energy company or something. Um, so the ego is closely allied with what Jung called the persona, the outward socialized mask we present to the world. The ego wears an immaculate white suit in the second part of the dream, as might befit the British Viceroy of India at the height of imperialism. The suit, with its aristocratic all-whiteness, carries an association of racial superiority. The immaculate whiteness is also a striking contrast to the natural setting of the dirt road and canyon or cliff wall of raw rock. The ego obviously still feels superior to and apart from messy nature, which must be put under control. And for all the ego's veneer of civilization and dignified bearing, nearby is the brutal phallic bodyguard, his hand itching to draw the gun. The panic of the soldier at the control panel was no doubt an appropriate response to a Vader who still holds an iron fist beneath his white linen gloves. From one point of view, he could say that the devil hath the power to assume a somewhat more pleasing shape. The ego no doubt has cards up its sleeve. Perhaps it's allowing itself to appear mortal and vulnerable so that we don't let down our guard. Possibly there is a laboratory on the Death Star where scientists work round the clock building a fully cyborg body for the ego, enabling it to achieve technological immortality and everlasting freedom from the organic world. In other words, where there'd be no organic tissue left, but it would all be, uploaded into silicon or something like that, because Darth Vader in the films is already a cyborg. The ego is a resilient function with a genius for creating illusion and deception. One would have to be a remarkably gifted paranoiac to invent motives and subterfuges darker and more devious than those of the power-driven, power-oriented ego. Although these suspicions are more than warranted, my inclination is to view the dream as a message about the ego's transforming duality. Its Luciferian aspect is still clearly present. Call me paranoid, but there's something about a guy named Darth Vader standing before a world control panel that I can't fully trust. On the other hand, the ego is not in control of the dream, and there's a feeling that the elderly Vincent Price aspect of it is also real. The dream seems to find the ego in a schizoid state, not sure where it stands. The efforts at power, control, and deception are still there, but it is also aware the control panel is malfunctioning, that the body is aged, and that there is strange adolescent handwriting on the walls. But before we consider the ego's possibly transformed awareness of mortality, let's consider the relationship of its Luciferian Luciferian aspects to nature. Just as Lucifer, according to the Bible, was once the brightest angel before the fall, the ego was once nature's brightest, most favored prodigy. The Bible tells us Lucifer was created by God, even though he sets himself apart from God and plays an adversarial role. Similarly, the ego was created by nature, even though it sets itself apart from nature and plays an adversarial role. Is God really separate from Lucifer, his own creation? Is nature really separate from the human ego, its creation? Natural, in quotes, carries an unconscious association with a Rousseau-like, sentimentalized view of kindly, gentle Mother Nature. For example, many food products boast of all-natural ingredients, but a soup made of cobra venom, scorpion tails, and bubonic plague could make the identical claim. Poliovirus is natural, while the vaccine is man-made. The ego is natural, if anything is, and the tendency to view it as bad because it is distinctively human rather than from elsewhere in nature is an ego-based illusion. In its Darth Vader personification in the dream, the ego may be slightly reforming its relationship to nature. Although it stands before the control panel with white-coated scientists and later strolls in a suit of sterile whiteness, it has made at least some aesthetic concessions to nature. The natural look of the control panel is in striking contrast to the synthetic, high-tech look of Vader's world in the films. Perhaps the natural-looking control panel reflects the ego's dawning concern for managing the environment without destroying it. Similarly, many corporate and power-based entities that contributed to the toxification of the environment are beginning to realize that the destruction of the biosphere is bad for the bottom line. Vader's willingness to expose his frail, aging face feels like a profound concession to mortality. He also shows some interest in stepping out of his cocoon and into the natural world. He walks on a dirt road and looks at a raw rock face. He is seen struggling to understand evolving human nature as expressed by the colored hieroglyphic chalk drawings of the adolescents. And that the drawings are hieroglyphic also suggests that they emanate from the collective unconscious rather than the contemporary culture of the adolescents. Okay, so I just added a sentence. This is what happens with beta testing, which is obviously very good. That their drawings are hieroglyphic rather than graffiti from the present era suggests they are expressing messages from the collective unconscious. The ego's personification is dual. It is both Darth Vader, who is in himself dual, and Vincent Price. From the deception point of view, we could suspect the ego of wanting to gain sympathy. Vincent Price was always the camp icon of horror films. His flamboyant portrayal of characters who were supposed to be sinister and ominous always seemed arch and humorously entertaining. Almost no one takes Vincent Price seriously as a personification of evil the way they take Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter. We might therefore suspect the ego of wanting to make light of any fears of it as boogeyman. But I am more inclined to view this Vincent Price aspect of the ego as revelatory rather than deceptive. Although the ego borrows the physiognomy of Price's face, it doesn't show a trace of Price's humor, and there's nothing campy about its appearance or manner. The face seems more like a revelation of true form than a borrowed disguise. Let's also consider Vincent Price's role in Edward Scissorhands, which I believe to be a central and intended association of the dream. In the film, he is an eccentric genius, a fairy tale mad scientist who seems as much an alchemist as a technological inventor. Like the actor portraying him, he is at the end of his life and near death, and his final invention is his only son. Again, we have a strange duality. From one point of view, Price would seem to be a reincarnation of Dr. Frankenstein, the ego as technological Prometheus seeking to rival and surpass nature's generative power. Like Dr. Frankenstein, he is creating life completely without the feminine. He is the father of a son with no mother. But unlike Dr. Frankenstein, Price seems very loving and kind. Perhaps he is sort of more like a Geppetto figure with Pinocchio. Perhaps he knows his own demise is approaching and loves Edward as much as any father loves his only son. Okay, I added another sentence there. More like Geppetto and Pinocchio than a Luciferian technologist. Perhaps he knows his own demise is approaching and loves Edward as much as any father loves his only son. Or most fathers, at least. Edward, like Frankenstein's monster, remember his gentle affection for the little girl, is an unexpectedly feminine creature despite this all-masculine birth. He is portrayed by Johnny Depp. I should put an Edward there. Edward is portrayed by Johnny Depp as androgynous, sensitive, gentle, and caring. Price's meddling with nature has brought something of great value into the world. His role might be akin to what the great alchemist Paracelsus saw as man's purpose, to finish nature. However, the first words we hear Edward speak are, "I'm not finished." He's referring to his metallic scissor hands. Normal-looking hands would have replaced them but for the untimely demise of the inventor before his creation could be completed. These frightening hands are capable of astonishing utility and creativity, but they also make it hard for Edward to perform ordinary tasks, dressing, eating, and he frequently wounds himself on his own blades. If the ego is, in a sense, the father, Edward himself is a hybrid. His unfinished technological hands give him creative power over nature, as when he sculpts hedges into living creatures. The creative gardener is an almost archetypal personification of man finishing nature. But Edward, unlike the ego, seeks love, not power, and his too powerful technological hands make this hard for him. Edward, like powder, that would be very inconvenient when making love to a person, for example. Edward, like powder, is a post-singularity adolescent mutant, unsure of his identity. Like powder, he has unnatural pallor, as if he were partly a corpse. Okay, so I added another sentence there. One imagines that potential lovers might be put off by being caressed by giant scissor hands. Edward, like powder, is a post-singularity adolescent mutant, unsure of his identity. Like powder, he has an unnatural pallor, as if he were partly a corpse. In some other ways, however, he is like a shy, alienated teenager. The technological proficiency ingrained in his being is much like that of a modern adolescent who has grown up in a world of smartphones and digital devices. He is innately adept at using these tools and would feel like an amputee without them. Added a phrase. He is innately adept at these tools and would feel like an amputee without them, but they also fracture relationships with other humans. But there is also an awareness that these powerful gifts can be harmful. They can cause self-inflicted, let me get rid of the but then, because I already answered that with that phrase. There's also an awareness that these powerful gifts can be harmful, that they can cause self-inflicted wounds and make love difficult. The ego, and its Vincent Price aspect, is reminding us that it is the father of the mutant and cannot be separated from the fate of the next evolutionary step. Here again we have a strange paradoxical duality. New life builds on prior forms, and the present ego-based psyche will have strong familiar connections with whatever succeeds it. The patriarchal ego may have a certain paternal claim, but we also leave the ego usurping the power of nature and claiming the feminine role in creation. The ego, as the story of Frankenstein reminds us, is not to be trusted in the role of creator. The feminine cannot be left out of creation, but the ego prefers an exclusively masculine world. Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, Price and Edward, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, each is a father with his only son, and mothers are conspicuously absent. Powder's mother dies in the cosmic event that creates his transformation. In the prequel trilogy, we learn that Vader had a partner, but in the original films, we never hear of her, and his children don't know her either. Vader has a daughter, Princess Leia, but he shows little interest in her. The ego in the dream is surrounded by male scientists, soldiers, and bodyguards. We don't see one woman in the dream. Its demeanor and presence personify what Jung called the solar phallic, or higher masculine power, mind and will. But nearby is the chthonic or lower phallic power of the bodyguard with his connection to power-oriented sex, genitalia, violence, and domination. We see higher and lower phallic principles combined in a typical dream image word pun, the control panel shaped like a great organ. The ego is as male as ever, and it wants to usurp the feminine role in creation. Perhaps that's another meaning of the green and wood tone control panel. And I guess I'll just make this an off-the-cuff aside, but we see a similar juxtaposition of the malign, higher phallic masculine archetypal energy in Lord of the Rings, juxtaposed with another creation. Maybe this should go in. Hang on. Okay, stand by. I'm going to create that footnote right now. Okay, here it is. The archetypes of malign solar phallic and chthonic phallic are juxtaposed in a scene in Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Rings, as I discussed in Casting Precious into the Cracks of Doom, Androgyny, Alchemy, and the One Ring. If you want to read it, just search for, or watch the YouTube, just search for Casting. I'll probably bring it up on zaporacle.com or my YouTube channel, Zaporacle. Lower phallic power is perfectly embodied in the movie version by the great Uruguay Uruk-hai orc that Saruman manifests out of a pit of slime in the earth. This orc embodies physical aggression, looks like a linebacker crossed with various animal essences, and doesn't know anything more than it needs to. It has no will of its own, no solar phallic power, and it is completely ruled by Saruman, who, after Soren, is the character most completely ruled by the solar phallic. Saruman also lives in a great phallic tower, Isengard, hence the title of the second book, The Two Towers, and has a, quote, a mind of metal and wheels, and does not care for growing things except as far as they serve him for the moment, and like Soren, is ruled by an electrified will to power. And so then, it also kind of illustrates that the chthonic phallic is the more feminine of the two archetypal phallic powers. So the Uruk-hai orc looks more masculine, like a linebacker, compared to this frail, withered man played by Christopher Lee playing Saruman. But Saruman is infinitely more powerful. He created the orc, and when Saruman first addressed to him is something like, and who do you serve? And the orc replies, Saruman. Okay, so in waking life, we certainly see the ego standing before control panels, altering nature. White-coated or suited ego personifications introduce genetically modified microorganisms, plants, and animals into our world. Once we foraged in the forest, then we learned to use our hands to make gardens and farms. But now ego-driven multinational corporations mediate between us and nature, growing GMO crops and chemical fertilizers, spraying them with pesticides, irradiating them, and selling them in microwavable plastic at the supermarket. We've allowed the ego to be in charge of nature and procreation, and can't be sure where that process and we can't be sure where that process will end. Given the opportunity to fulfill its ambitions, perhaps the ego will create artificial intelligence that propagates itself in a virtual world that really will be childhood's end. That's what the transhumanist wants. So I'm going to add per transhumanist wishes. Is it possible for the ego to create an alternative or parallel evolutionary track to that of the human species? Consider how much computers have evolved in the last few decades compared to the same span of human evolution. The ego might seek to avoid mortality by using artificial life to replace or mutate organic evolution. Via computational biology. For your next lifetime, why be reborn through messy, inefficient Mother Nature when you can be rebooted by Turbogenesis Incarnator version 7.1? For neurological materialists, at least, consciousness is reducible to wetware, and so a digital rebirth seems plausible to them. Perhaps the ego has a cybernetic card up its sleeve. In the dream, however, the Vader Price character seems to be feeling its age and acknowledging its mortality. Similarly, heads of multinational corporations and governments read the statistical projections and may realize that they have to content themselves with managing the end of the world. In the dream, all right, I added something that sentence. Similarly, heads of multinational corporations and governments read the statistical projections and the intrinsic AI alignment problem and may realize they have to content themselves with managing the end of the world. In the dream, the ego sees the handwriting on the wall. The handwriting is colorful and adolescent, rendered in hieroglyphic chalk on rock. Since the markings are chalk, they are recent and temporally fragile, but they also resonate with the ancient world and appear Egyptian. The hieroglyphic expression suggests the archetypes and the collective unconscious as channeled by a new generation. In Jungian literature, there is a famous example of the timeless memory of the collective unconscious in the dream of a modern girl who manifests motifs of ancient Egyptian mythology unknown to her waking self. In Terence McKenna's The Archaic Revival, he discusses the return, especially among adolescents, of archaic practices such as body piercing, drum circles, paganism, magic, herbal healing, and the use of natural hallucinogens. Of course, that was written in the 80s, I believe, so now those things are, those adolescents are now often middle-aged or older. Aspects of the ancient world keep returning through the young, and the ego isn't sure what to make of them, but may be intelligent enough to sense that they are harbingers of change beyond its control. The spatial occurrence of the hieroglyphs in the dream is also significant. They are far over the head of the ego and several body lengths out of reach. The dream tells us that the ego is still powerful and dangerous, yet also a paradoxical, complex entity with conflicting motives and self-ambivalence. It may be nearing the end of its life in its patriarchal form, but it will not be without a role in the creation of what's to come. And this is the end of the extremely long Future of the Ego paragraph broken into two parts. So this was part 2. Next chapter will relate to dynamic paradoxes in evolution.